You probably already know that your website is one of the most important outward-facing aspects of your business. You've made it look beautiful, you've written the copy so it converts really well, but what are you doing to protect it as an asset of your business? Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm Amy Nessheim. I'm a lawyer for creative entrepreneurs just like you and the founder of Artful. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to protect your website. I'm going to give you 5 simple steps that you can go and implement today to make sure that your website is protected and not actually a liability, meaning a danger to your business, when it should be one of the most important things, bringing in customers and helping your business grow. So before we dive in, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit the little bell so that you get notified every time I have a new video. That way you can stay on top of all of the legal stuff you need to know to run your business the right way. All right, so let's get started on the 5 things that you need to do to protect your website. The first thing is to put in place solid website policies for your website. And so those are basically 3 different things. That is your privacy policy, which I'm sure you've heard a ton about, your terms and conditions, and a disclaimer if you need one. Now, I have a couple other videos on disclaimers, and I'm going to be releasing a few on terms and conditions and privacy policies. So I won't go into too much detail about that now, but what you need to know is that your website policies basically, they give your visitor details about how they are supposed to behave on your website and what your obligations to them are, what their rights are, and then what the things are that you're not going to be held liable for, what you're not responsible for. And that is super important because sometimes there can be a misunderstanding between you and your website visitor about what they expect to get from you. And that can be things like that your website's available 24/7 all the time. You don't want someone suing you just because your server was down for 5 minutes and they really wanted to access your content for those 5 minutes. And it can also be things like what's acceptable to post onto your website if you allow visitor submissions like blog comments. It's really important to have a policy in place about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable to post, and then that you also have a system for looking through those posts to take down the ones that are not acceptable. But having that policy in place lets visitors know ahead of time that they can't just say whatever they want. So those are mostly in the terms and conditions. And then the privacy policy is really important because there are laws about what you can and can't do with the information that you collect from your visitors and what rights they have to know about what information you collect, what you do with that information, how you use it, whether you sell it, how you store it, all of that. And so that should all go into your privacy policy. And you might think, oh, I don't really interact with my visitors, but behind the scenes, your cookies, your analytics, and then also just your email submission, your pop-up forms for collecting emails, all of that is collecting data from your website visitors. And so they need to know what you're doing with that data. And that's where your privacy policy comes in. And then also disclaimers are just a way of letting your visitors know that you aren't responsible for certain aspects of your interaction with them. Like, for example, if you give financial advice, that you're not actually their financial advisor, or if you give tax advice, that you're not a CPA, something like that, just to get you to clarify your role in giving them advice. And if you want some more details on disclaimers and when you need them, you can go ahead and check out this video, linked somewhere on the screen right now. And then come right on back here to make sure that you catch up on all of the things you need to do for your website. So that's number 1, have website policies in place. Step number 2 to protecting your website involves protecting your intellectual property. The way that you behave on your website, the way that you present it can put your intellectual property at risk or protect it. So first of all, intellectual property is the intangible kind of creative content and branding, things like the content that you create, photographs that you use on your site, your copy, basically anything that's created by the human mind and then put into some kind of physical form, like written down or on a website. And you have rights to that property just like you would have rights to a physical property, like a book that you own or something. And you want to make sure that you're protecting it properly. So the way that you do that, first of all, is just to make sure at the bottom of your website that you have the name of your business with the copyright symbol next to it and the year. And that just puts everyone on alert that you own the content of your website, that you're saying, this is mine, I own the copyright, no one else can copy it, no one can steal it. And so it just puts everyone else on alert that you are staking a claim to the content on your website so that no one else can just think that they have the right to take it. The other aspect of intellectual property that's really important is trademarks. And so that basically refers to the rights that you have over your branding. So any kind of symbol or slogan or words that identify your company, which is basically your branding, that can all be trademarked. And you, by using your branding, you have a trademark in it. You don't have to necessarily register it federally, but it is important to put everyone else on notice that you have a claim in that trademark. So what you can do is, first of all, make sure that you use your trademarks consistently. So if you have a slogan, make sure it's used the same every time, use your name the same every time, have a consistent logo. And this is important for just marketing in general too. You want people to be able to identify your brand, but it also gives you stronger rights in your trademarks. And the second way you can protect it is by using the TM symbol next to your business name and any slogans or product lines, the name of a product, anything that is uniquely yours in your brand. You can put the TM symbol next to it, and that just means trademark, and it doesn't indicate that it is federally registered. So only use that if you haven't registered your trademark with the USPTO, the US Patent and Trademark Office. But it puts everyone on notice that you have a claim to that name, that it's yours, and that no one can copy it. Now, if you have registered your trademark federally, use the R with a circle around it symbol instead. Don't use TM. The R just means that it is a trademark that is registered federally. So again, just use your trademarks consistently, meaning your name of your business, the name of your products, product lines. Use them all consistently, and use the TM symbol next to it just to indicate your ownership of that trademark. Step number 3 is to only use content that either you own or you have a license to use on your website. This ties in a little bit with the intellectual property discussion that we just had. So your content, like your photographs and blog posts and all of that, it's intellectual property too. And usually with intellectual property, the person who created it is the owner. And this is really important for websites, especially when it comes to photography. So you might use a website like Unsplash or Pexels where you can log in and then there's a whole bunch of images that you're just free to use. Or you might hire someone to take brand specific stock photography for you, or you might buy a bundle of stock photography to use on your site. Either way, you need to understand your ownership rights to those images and your licensing rights, which means, do you have permission to use it, and in what way do you have permission? So anytime you enter an agreement for stock photography with a photographer, or you use one of those sites like Pexels or Unsplash, you want to make sure that you understand how you are able to use those images. So make sure you read the agreement when you sign up for a Creative Commons site, and you understand whether you need to provide attribution, meaning just say who the photos by on your site, or if you need to link to them, or what types of requirements there are for your ability to use that photography. And the same goes if you've hired someone to do it. Usually in that case, you'll have purchased a license to use that imagery, but it might have limitations on it, like you need to attribute it to the photographer. So just make sure that anytime you post something on your site, you understand whether you own it and what type of license you have, meaning what you need to do in order to use it legally, in order to use it with permission, basically. You want to make sure that any of the content that you have on your site you're using with permission, so that you're not risking your business being sued by someone else saying, hey, I didn't give you permission to use that. You have to take it down, and potentially you have to pay damages to that person for using their content without your permission. There is also another aspect of this that is really important, that is kind of related. So if you have testimonials or images of your clients or any of your employees, anyone related to your business, you need to make sure that you have permission to use either their written text or their image. And you want to make sure that you have that in writing and you keep it on file with your business. So you don't want to be using something that was created by someone else or an image of someone else without their permission, because again, that can get you in trouble. So if you're finding this content helpful so far, if you are enjoying this list, if it's making sense to you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified next time I release a video with things that you need to know to legally protect your business. And as we go along, if you have a question about what you need to do to protect your website, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer it for you. All right, so let's move on to number 4 on our list of how to protect your website. So number 4 on our list is make sure that you have policies in place about user submissions. Now, I mentioned this a little bit in the first topic about terms and conditions for your website, but it's just so important that I'm gonna say it again. You need to make sure that you have clear policies in place and systems in your business for what people are allowed to say in their comments or in their submissions to you, and then also for what your policies are inside your business, your procedures internally for managing those submissions. Now, this is so important because you can be liable as a business and as the owner and operator of the website for things that your visitors do on your site, for the submissions that they make to your site. So if someone makes a comment on your blog that is, for example, defamatory or hate speech or violates someone else's trademark or intellectual property rights, then you can be liable as the owner of that website, as the person who manages that forum, for the content of that person's submission. Even though you didn't write it, you can still be held responsible for the content of that submission. So this is why it's so important to make it clear to your website visitors and the people who submit to your website what is allowed and what's not allowed. And then also have systems in place in your business to review comments as they come in and potentially even not allow comments until they've been reviewed. And then also to take them down and make sure that your visitors can understand and are notified ahead of time in your policies that you have posted on your site that you are allowed to take their stuff down, that they can't just say whatever they want and you have to keep it up. You want to make sure that they understand that you have the right to take down anything that could be potentially damaging, and based on solely your own judgment. So that's basically 2 different steps there. So 1, you need to have the outward facing policy that you show your visitors so that they can see exactly what they're allowed to say and not allowed to say. And then you also need to have the internal procedures within your business for reviewing comments and then also taking them down if necessary, and potentially even blocking repeat offenders. And again, this is so important because your business can be held liable for the content of comments that show up on your site. All right, so just one last step in this video for how to protect your website legally. And number 5 is make sure that your website is accessible. Now, you may or may not have heard about website accessibility as a kind of popular topic that's out there right now, but the basic issue is that there are people who need to use assistive devices or who have certain disabilities that influence the way that they interact with websites and their ability to read the content or hear the content, perceive it in a certain way visually, or who need to use assistive devices to be able to have the content read to them or something like that. And the issue, the reason it's controversial is because in America, Americans with disabilities are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there is no clear guidance under the law about whether websites are covered under that act that requires accommodations for people with disabilities. So there are some lawyers out there who have been taking advantage of that by finding websites that have clear violations, are clearly not accessible to a certain portion of the population, and filing lawsuits against those companies, claiming that they violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is up in the air about whether they actually do or not right now. But there is no debate that they are not accessible. The debate is about whether that is breaking the law. So what you can do is do your best to make sure that your website is accessible. And this isn't just because it's legally required or might be legally required or you might get sued for it. It's important to make sure that your website is accessible, meaning able to be used by everyone, and that broadens your market reach. You want to make sure that you are reaching the most broad market that you can, and that includes people with disabilities or who need to use assistive technology to access your website. So what you can do is just do your best to make sure that your website is accessible. And my next video is going to be talking about the steps that you can take even if you have no website development skills. If you don't know anything about coding, there are steps that you can take to make sure your website is more accessible. And that includes things like just choosing colors that are highly contrasting so that you don't, for example, have red and green on top of each other and red text on a green background that's impossible to read for someone who's colorblind, for example. And then it's also just a high contrast, like you don't want to have light gray text on a white background. So there are a few easy things that you can do to make sure that your website is accessible, and then also a few things that you can do to make sure that screen readers have an easier time reading your website. And the great thing about this is that it broadens your market reach, but also if the screen readers can read it, so can Google. So it makes your website much more SEO friendly and improves your search engine ranking. So make sure you check in again to find out what those things are that you can do. I think it's going to be 12 steps that you can take to make your website more accessible, even if you don't know how to code. So make sure you hit the subscribe button to get notified when that video comes out. So that's it for now. That was 5 tips on how to legally protect your website. And I hope that was really helpful for you. Give me a like if it was, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.